What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the E-Commerce Influence Podcast. My name is Austin Brawner, and I am super excited about today's episode. I have a wonderful, wonderful guest who you guys are all going to enjoy. He's been on the podcast multiple times. But before I get into who I brought on the podcast, in this week's podcast, I want to talk about something that is exciting coming up. So our next cohort of the Brand Growth Accelerator kicks off on February 1st. So if you are a founder of an e-commerce business and you feel like maybe your business is a little bit disorganized, maybe you lack proper systems, you don't have a clear plan for the upcoming year, the Accelerator is for you. It's an 8-week program. Will help you find clarity on your mission, make connections with other high level e-commerce entrepreneurs, and unlock growth in your business over this next year without sacrificing your health, personal life, or family. If that sounds interesting to you and you want to be a part of this cohort, there's going to be 30 people in the next cohort. You can go to brandgrowthexperts.com/accelerator, fill out an application and chat with a member of my team. And we'll give you some tips about how to get clear about what you want in your business and see if you're the right fit for the program. It's going to be epic. We've run it now 3 times. It's one of our most successful programs. I'd love to have you in it. So go check it out, brandgrowthexperts.com/accelerator. Now let's dive into the episode. So our guest today is Drew Sanocki. Drew was the CEO of AutoAnything. He's the founder of nerdmarketing.com, one of the smartest e-commerce blogs on the planet. He has been a friend of mine for about 8 years. We actually worked together and created our first brand growth intensive, which was an email marketing focused intensive where people came in, worked with us for a couple of days and overhauled their lifecycle marketing campaigns. He is the owner of PostPilot, which is a software company that is kind of like Klaviyo for direct mail. He's had many different projects. He recently turned 50. We talk about that and what he's learned over the last 15 years. And he shares kind of his journey on buying AutoAnything and then becoming the CEO, acquiring a bunch of companies, what it's like to run a $100 million retailer. He's also been in the seat of a smaller company. When he was younger, he started a dropship retailer, scaled it up to multi-7-figure, and then sold it. He is a wealth of knowledge. You might have heard him in other podcasts or known about him in the space as he's been around for a while. I love talking to Drew. He's super sharp. I think you're going to enjoy this episode as well. So without further ado, let's bring Drew in and kick this thing off. Drew, welcome to the show.
It's good to be here. Do this.
Man, I'm excited, man. It's been a while since we had you on. I think it's been on maybe 3 to 4 times, and I always get plenty of people asking afterwards. Bring Drew back. I want to hear from Drew. But first, I want to start it off, man, because
there's you know, like Conan has like there's some guests that they can get fairly regularly because they're just always available. And that's the most popular guest. Is that kind of the role I'm playing here? Like no one else could make it.
Dude, I'm happy to have you back. We got some big news, right? First of all, you just turned 50.
I did. Yeah. Last 3-4 days ago. It's awesome.
And you're also seemingly in the best shape of your life. Or at least for a while. You sent me a video of you. I don't know if you'd been lifting weights or something, but you were just looking absolutely shredded. What's your secret?
There was context there. It's not just like I send you shirtless, topless videos of myself. I did a video, like a funny video from another guy's birthday, in which I happened to be topless. Is the context?
Yes.
And you were like, "Oh, you look thinner." So yeah, it's like, yeah, I've been working out. You know, COVID's been good to me.
Been good. Are you still carnivore?
I would say 90. That's been a big part of it. So
yeah.
Started carnivore maybe like a year and a half ago, and I mean it's essentially like super low carb, and my weight just started dropping, and then another breakthrough was kind of when I went like super high protein.
Yeah.
And I think that just took it to a whole new level. Because even on carnivore, you can eat a lot of fatty cuts of meat and I guess technically cheeses and creams, and you're not going to lose a lot of weight if you do that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I wanted to bring you back because, I always get a good check-in on Drew. You usually like go and work on projects. I know this is something that you've talked about, that you like to go work on something, then come back and teach about it. Work on something, come back and teach. You've been working on a big project for the last couple of years you took over as the CEO of AutoAnything. I would love to start there. How did you first get involved with that project? Let's start with the story of how did you get involved and what kind of took place over the last couple of years as you've been working on it?
Yeah, I kind of jump back and forth between running an agency and then going operational and kind of taking these operational roles for, often they end up being agency clients because our agency works with private equity groups, and if they get a project that's sort of like a really good fit or interesting to me, I might take an operational role. So this one was with a new fund called Kingswood. New fund, but an old friend of mine who is at the fund who started it. And 3 years ago, they bought a company called AutoAnything out of a bigger company, AutoZone. So it was like a corporate divestiture. And then I went on board and ultimately became the CEO of the company. Grew it for 3 years. So we made 2 or 3 different acquisitions. We launched we incubated a new site. So we ended up with 5 sites at the end. And then we just exited like 3 weeks ago to an e-commerce aggregator.
Exciting. So what does that mean for you? So you were in it for 3 years, kind of all in. I know you've been working super hard, and you have gone through a bunch. What does it actually mean for the exit for you? Are you still in it? Are you transitioning out? What's kind of your role now?
I handed off the reins to. I had another person who's really high performer. One of the things I think we take pride in is like we found a lot of talent within the organization, and we're able to like shine a spotlight on that and get people into roles where they're really playing to their strengths. And this guy kind of came up through the ranks, I think, in sales and then in ops, and now he is the GM of AutoAnything. So I handed that over about when we, maybe a week after we exited the business.
Exciting. So let's talk a little bit about what happened there. So I guess looking back on this, you started about 3 years ago. What were some of the biggest things that you learned from taking over this organization? Was this the biggest organization that you'd led before, or had you been in one situation where you've led? Because it was over 100 employees when you started, or what?
Yeah, well, it was probably like 250 when we bought the company. 250 employees, probably like, I don't know, just over 100 million in revenue. And primarily through acquisition, we got that revenue number up. So it was a little bit on the larger size for what I was at a SaaS company that was about the same size as CMO. But what I learned from it, I mean, it's just as hard running a small business as it is running a big business. And I feel like there's this inflection point, maybe when you get over 10 million in revenue, where you can start hiring middle management. And I think like the CEO job here was actually, I enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. It wasn't because as a CEO, not a lot falls. You don't have to get that operational at a company that size. You got great VPs. I had a great CMO, great CFO who take on a lot of the work, and not even them. I mean, their direct reports do a lot of the day-to-day work. It was really refreshing as a CEO to strictly think in terms of strategy, managing the investors in the business, and then looking for acquisitions was great.
Let's talk about the acquisitions. So you said you had a couple acquisitions during your time. What was the first one that you took over, and how did you find it?
Yeah, we had a couple that worked, a couple that that didn't, many more that did not work out or never saw the light of day. The first was a company, Morris 4x4, which is a Jeep retailer. It kind of came through the private equity network that it was owned by another brand that really didn't have the D2C chops to kind of, I think they aspired to go direct, but ultimately it was too much work. They wanted to stick to their brand. And so we acquired it off them. And it's just like, this is a $50 million brand that I think we doubled like in 3 months, just the top line, just by implementing many of the best practices that I'm sure your audience is well aware of, making sure your SEO is dialed, your lifecycle campaigns are all lined up, you're measuring ROI and looking at like your Facebook spend accordingly, just doing like the blocking and tackling. We were able to really grow that business. And then the second one was called Leonard Accessories. We closed on that really just 3 months ago. That's a truck accessories business. In retrospect, it wasn't really the strategy to kind of go and roll up a category, but we essentially ended up with an aggregator, where we had these centralized teams and staff functions around marketing and finance and ops. And then as we would acquire these businesses, we'd implement the playbooks, grow the businesses. We were really getting the audience size up there. I think the last piece of the puzzle was to introduce private label and get the margin profile better. And that's ultimately where we sold the business. That project in itself was like the one that sort of like the money left on the table for that business.
Sure. So let's talk about the sale here. So I'm interested, how did you determine that it was the right time to move on? Was this kind of always your plan, 3 years and then move on? Or how did you guys think about it from when you purchased the company to when you actually sold it?
I think private equity in general has like that 3 to 5 year timeline for an investment. That was never a line in the sand for this business, but it was more dictated by the macroeconomic factors, right? So, we grew like a weed through COVID, and then really 2021, like many businesses, kind of went sideways because of supply chain. Like we couldn't find product to sell. The demand was off the charts and we couldn't satisfy it. And the business has a certain level of like fixed expenses. So, this was probably the one, I don't even want to say it was a conflict between us and the investors, but it was like the one time where management and the investors weren't had a little bit of a discussion about what to do. In other words, management was probably wanted to cut down, and we're like, okay, we're going to ride the supply chain thing out. We're going to go for the home run in a couple of years, because it was looking like we could ultimately go public with this business or do something really big. Whereas the investors were like, well, we're already up from where we bought the business. Let's just take some money off the table. Let's take the win. And maybe they were more pessimistic about supply chain than the management team was, but we ultimately, they win. And that's cool. I think we're all happy with how it worked out. So we exited the business probably a year earlier than we had hoped, just because of the supply chain situation.
So it felt like it seems from the outside perspective, you guys were hit even harder than some other businesses, because my understanding is AutoAnything is a dropship retailer.
Right.
From your perspective, what were some of the biggest challenges? You said you couldn't get product, right? What was it like? When did that transition happen for you, when the supply chain kind of broke down? And what are some of the things that you learned over the last year as you were running the business and more of these issues kept cropping up?
Yeah, it's like live by drop shipping, die by drop shipping. It's an operational model that works in certain categories. It makes a lot of sense for automotive because there's a long tail of product. Like we're realistically not going to inventory,
Sure.
every year, make, model of vehicle of a floor mat, right? So drop shipping does make sense, but you got to realize it is in many ways like a just-in-time inventory model. So you get the order, you send it to the vendor or the manufacturer who ships the product out. And as soon as there's variability in that chain, the wheels kind of come off, right? And variability in terms of as what we saw, March, I want to say it was March of last year or this year, we had epic top line demand. We're all high-fiving. And then all of a sudden we had really big cancellations, like 15, 20%. And so we had to start looking like, why do we have so many cancels? And we dug into it and it was like, man, so many vendors canceled the purchase orders. Like they couldn't fulfill the order, or they changed the date around so much that customers end up canceling the order.
Sure.
And so it's, I think we first realized something was going on back in March, and the rest of the year was really playing catch up. It was like, auto industry in particular has been hit really hard. I mean, if you've been following like rubber and silicon and chips that are in cars, new cars are not coming to market as the inventories are down. So it was like raw materials in Asia. It was factories in Asia getting backed up where they had COVID related like shutdowns. It was getting products on the water and then offloaded here in the States, where you're basically like paying 10, 20 times as much for a container ship. And it's almost like extortion at the pier to get your product off. Like all that stuff just for us meant variability. It meant like we could not tell a customer often when the order was going to ship because we had no idea. And try as we may, like the vendor has no idea too, right? So with that kind of variability, it makes it hard to convert an order. And if you convert it, customer ends up pissed off because they didn't get their product on time, or it came late, or it came early, and they hold you accountable even though you explain drop shipping, and that doesn't work. So it's a great model if you have that sort of line of sight into your supply chain. Not so great when you don't.
Yeah, it was interesting too. You mentioned March, because like March and then April, May, it was kind of an interesting time. I remember thinking back, there was such high levels of optimism in the spring of last year. It was like, all right, everyone starts taking these vaccines, and there was like this overwhelming feeling, it's the end. It's the end. I remember them even putting like these videos of people dancing and stuff on Saturday Night Live, or I don't know. It was like extreme exuberance of like, it's over, it's going back to normal and all these different things. And then it didn't.
Yeah. I mean, we're doing backflips around the office. I mean, it was not only like the world's coming out of COVID, but we just experienced such a surge. Like everybody was working on their vehicles through COVID. So it was like, man, I want to say the company grew like 5 years in a year, and it was sort of, the world's our oyster. Like this, we're going to IPO. We just need to get some of our own proprietary product through to the audience. We were feeling good about things like a year ago. In retrospect, a good time to have sold the business.
So what are your thoughts on the supply chain challenges and issues? I don't know how, I imagine you spent a good amount of time looking at it. What do you think we're going to see? Do you think it's going to come back to normal anytime soon? Do you see, what is your expectation over the next couple of years?
Look, every industry is different. I mean, for ours, we were talking to colleagues who run automotive at Walmart, and Amazon, and they probably have a much better view than we do, or more accurate view on what's going on. And they were saying like mid-year 2022. So we knew, we were doing the calculus internally, like, hey, we've got to get lean, get just really lean to ride this thing out. We had these plans to migrate the whole beast over to Shopify. Each one of them, I think we have 5 retailers at the end. Each one of them would be on Shopify, running through like a back-end platform, run by really, I don't want to say a skeleton crew, but a small team on each one, which would have been a nice model. I'm kind of curious to how it would have worked out. I think it worked out best for our team that we sold the business instead, because the acquiring company does not have the capital constraints we did, and they're ready to, just blow it out even bigger. Yeah. But yeah, I think internally we were thinking we got to make it like at least through halfway through next year.
Figure it out. It's been interesting. I've been following a couple people on Twitter that are really into it, and you've got some people saying, "Oh yeah, it's going to come back," and then you've got CEO of Flexport being like, "I don't see any way this comes back in the next year and a half."
Yeah.
And I think it's a really strange time, because there's like this feeling of things kind of coming back to normal, but then we're fully exposed to the fact that our economy is built on the backs of, for the most part, people who we don't even think about, right? Or like processes that we don't even think about until they break down.
Yep.
And I don't know, it's been overall a very interesting experience, something that you just take for granted, a lot of the kind of grunt work that needs to get done to be able to make things happen in our society.
Yeah. And in retrospect, there's just a handful of key decisions that really changed the fate of a company like mine. In other words, we elected to start private label this year. Like, what if we had started that a year earlier? The year prior, we were making a lot of runs at acquiring FBA businesses and product businesses, none of which went anywhere. So we ultimately decided to incubate, build our own floor mats program, car covers. How it ended up, like we couldn't get those product. I mean, we had the products designed, they were ready to go. We just couldn't get them. Like, what if we had them a year earlier and they were in the warehouse? I think it would have been a completely different year for us had we done that, Yeah. And in retrospect, like we took a big dividend out of the business right after COVID, right? And it was something that like the business was just throwing off so much cash, we could almost pay off our entire investor base with one dividend payment. And then we're playing with house money. And in retrospect, if we had just sunk that into private label inventory instead, the business would, maybe we could have gotten bigger. So there were things like that I think about, like those little decisions you make, which seem like they're sort of well-informed at the time, really can, change your fate going forward.
Yeah. It's very interesting. Well, you've been on kind of all different sides of businesses, running smaller businesses, larger businesses. You've been doing it for a while. What, over the last couple of years, I guess my question is, maybe it's just on this AutoAnything time, which is the last 3 years, how have you grown and how have you changed as a leader?
You didn't tell me you were going to ask that one. It's a tough question, man. But it's one that I've thought about because I don't think there's any going back to, I don't want to say to like a small company. It's just like I think about things a little bit more strategically now. I think it's so easy. First of all, I have most of my needs taken care of, like financially now, which changes the calculus on a lot of decisions, which I realize impacted my decisions early on because it wasn't so much about creating enterprise value or being strategic as much as it was cash flow in the short term. Be it like I need to do some consulting or I need to just think about making a buck. I think I can be more strategic now. Plus the experience was sort of a crash course in private equity and raising money and dealing with strategic buyers, all of which show me just, it sort of like was a black box before. I think I was the most comfortable kind of like putting my blinders on, opening up Klaviyo and working on flows. And I realized that's just a piece of the puzzle now, and you can be a lot more strategic and impact the business more by kind of, getting outside of your computer a bit, maybe getting on the phone. So those are probably the big things. And now like my own calculus as far as like how I spend my time has changed. I'm going for bigger wins now.
Well, when you say that, so like, what does it actually look like? What does your day-to-day look like now compared to, you mentioned earlier, maybe at one point you were more comfortable just being like, all right, I want to dive into Klaviyo, start building these flows, these are proven ways to make money. What does your calendar look like now?
Ideally, it's open most days. I've been doing a lot more phone calls now, especially because I'm sort of in this transition period. So we sold to an e-commerce aggregator like a Thrasio. It's not Thrasio, but it's they're called e-commerce brands. They aspire to roll up more and more companies and ultimately have an exit. Mm-hmm. So I'm working with them to help do that. But I've been focusing on PostPilot, which I know we've talked about before, which is this software company I acquired probably 3 years ago. And that thing's been growing like a weed. And I feel like, so I am not diving into that by like opening up the code base or, working on actually like cranking out my own content. It's more, how do I, if I've got what I think is sort of like lightning in a bottle here with this business, how do I grow that faster and create the most enterprise value over the next year? And I don't think it's cranking out blog posts or getting inside of Klaviyo. We don't use Klaviyo, but something, we use Intercom, but something like that. I think it's, do we raise money from whom, or do we retain all the equity? Who do I hire? Like, what are the critical pieces that we need? And what's the strategy that's going to get us to an 8 or 9 figure exit?
So let's talk about PostPilot, because it is really interesting. And I know it's grown substantially while you have. What has been your role for the last 3 years in PostPilot? Has it just been owner? Have you been hands-on at all? What does it look like for you?
Yeah, we hired a CEO, which was huge. Maybe it was a year ago at this point, but it was kind of like, I kind of look at maybe AutoAnything was my last CEO gig. Maybe from now on, I'm going to be a little bit more like acquiring businesses and working to get that operator in place, because I think that allows you to, number one, to scale up more, diversify your risk across a couple different investments and your time, and also play to your strengths a little, or play to my strengths a little bit more, which are probably on putting the deals together, recruiting, thinking strategically about the business, right, and then moving on. So, in the case of PostPilot, it was throwing off enough cash. We hired that CEO, and that just essentially removed me as the bottleneck. Everything had to go through me initially, or my business partner, and now, like, I've got a CEO there who's incentivized to kind of run with it, make decisions, and it's a lot more like a weekly call with that person where we review all the metrics and talk about how he needs help, really.
Sure. How do you find a CEO? Where do you start to hire a CEO? What have you learned about hiring CEOs? Because it's not the first CEO you've hired.
Right. It's, it's personal. It ends up being my personal network. I know guys like Andrew Wilkinson find mostly through social media, like the guy posts to Twitter, Andrew, who runs Ecommerce.
He's got a prolific Twitter following.
He pushes on Twitter, and I think that's like his sort of his oil well for mining for talent. But for me, it's just been personal network. I know I hit you up every time I'm hiring, and you get intros to people, and you find the right person who's kind of usually earlier on in their career and wants a shot for some equity and a good paycheck. And usually that's good. That's great when I find that person.
Do you have any tips on structuring deals? Like, how would you, when you say they're incentivized, is every deal different? Do you have like kind of a way that you think about structuring?
For management?
Yeah.
Yeah. Usually we've adopted sort of what I see is typical across a lot of private equity, which is like you buy a company, you carve out 10 to 15% for the management team. And typically the way that works is, depending on the size of the business, the CEO might be, for a really big business, 1% or 2%, but for a smaller business, that might go up to like 5, 6, 7%. And you really, it's a conversation between you and the CEO. He's like, this is the management pool. You can allocate this as you need to. And typically you're allocating it to people who pose such a key person risk to the business that if they leave, you're screwed. Or if you really need some talent like a CEO or a CMO to recruit them in, you offer them up equity. I've never been as much of a fan of stock options because I think that just is hard. For companies of our size, private companies, I really like grants instead. I think option plans are just overkill. I think most employees at most companies aren't asking for options. They're hard to administer. We're not Google, we're not Apple. PostPilot, for example, we've carved out that 15% management pool. The CEO probably has around 5%, and that will vest over time. And then it's up to him if we need to use the remaining 10% to recruit talent, we can do that. Otherwise, it reverts back into the common stock when we exit the business.
Sure.
Makes sense. I like that 15% amount as a rule of thumb. And then we also switch over to a bonus plan. I'm a big fan of bonus plans based off the profitability of the business.
What you're talking about with Andrew Wilkinson, recruiting through Twitter, kind of reminded me of a different conversation I had with a woman named Barbara Turley. She runs a virtual assistant business that helps partner virtual assistants with companies. And she's like, I found my first 100 through referrals. Mm-hmm. And then I got to a certain level of scale where I could no longer do that. Right. And it was like, oh, now I need to have another channel to start bringing in these virtual assistants. I feel like that's probably the way to, for the first 5 that you hire, you probably go in your in network. And then afterwards you need some, he's probably got to the point now where he's like, I need a channel to bring in some sort of a CEO pool.
Yeah. How repeatable is that need going to be? If you run a fund, it's going to be repeatable. You need to hire constantly.
Yeah.
I think I see the next 5 years of my life as, not running a fund, probably just a handful of bets. And so maybe I don't need to build out that kind of pipeline.
Yeah. End of the year, getting towards the end of the year here. What are you excited about for the next year?
PostPilot.
Yeah.
I think it's I don't know if you see this, but it's like direct mail. It's sort of like its time has come, and maybe it was here, in the 70s or something, but it's like between iOS is just killing people. I've seen so many businesses just drop off a cliff on Facebook, right? Because they can't track. And as you know, now it's harder to track through email. Postcard marketing, direct mail has just experienced this resurgence, and we're kind of riding that wave. I think it's going to be thought of as another marketing channel that everybody needs to play in, much like email. I mean, if you remember when we started, I don't know, when we first met 10 years ago, whenever it was, you almost had to convince people to get onto email, convince people that email was like a good channel, and that life cycle marketing in particular was really important. And now it's like, it's the playbook, right? It's like, are my life cycle emails set up?
If you think about it as just looking at Klaviyo and the growth of Klaviyo,
yeah,
right. I think they're only been around for 7-8 years,
yeah,
and they're now over $1 billion company. But when they first started, it was exactly what you said. It was like, no, there's these things that these are triggered automatically, and like that was a novel concept,
right? And then you think, okay, well, I've seen, we have a PostPilot customer, a supplement business that was getting, call it like $10K a month off of their email sequences, maybe off of their win backs, for example. Every month, just like clockwork, they'd bring them back. They'd get about 10K in revenue. They launched the same win back on postcards and got 50K. Now they're getting 50K every month. And why is that? That's what they asked. And it's like, because 80% of your customers aren't on your mailing list. They're not on your email list. They either have unsubscribed or they never subscribed. And so you think about it, we've got this big list of customers that you really haven't been able to message cost effectively until now. And so we really aim to have PostPilot become that Klaviyo for postcard marketing, to be that easy.
I think you're right as far as the timing being right? Like a lot of market forces have come together. It's kind of back to what you were saying about running your previous business, right? There's all these things you can't really factor for, right? Like, I think when you bought it, we weren't thinking like in the future, it's going to be harder to track on Facebook or on email. All the momentum had been in the opposite direction, where it had been easier to track and easier to track.
Or that Facebook ads or Google ads would become like more expensive than sending a postcard, which is also like, as they've become arbitraged, now they are more expensive. It used to be like easier and cheaper to do Facebook, and now it's like harder to track and more expensive. So,
oh man, it's been a kind of a crazy. It's been a crazy 2 years, really.
Right.
And there's been so many things that have come in over the last couple of years. I think for the first time, Moiz Ali first tweeted this like 6 months ago, but it was like, for the first time, we're actually facing headwinds in e-commerce rather than tailwinds. And a bunch of them. It's iOS updates, it's shipping challenges, labor challenges. They continue to go on having to hold more inventory. I've talked to so many different people about having to hold so much more inventory than they have in the past. But it's all lined up in a sense where it makes something like direct mail, especially if you're trying to be more profitable, a really good option. What's like the best what's been working the best? I mean, you mentioned the supplement company. That's kind of a no-brainer because it's a replenishment product and you're sending back. What have you been seeing from looking at different accounts? Like what's working?
Well, right now, I mean, it's just like email. Where would you start on email with retention, right?
Abandoned carts.
Abandoned carts. We're getting into browse abandonment, win-back campaigns, customers ordering regularly, then they stop, they order every week and then all of a sudden it's been 3 weeks. You can send them a win-back, ideally with a discount ladder. You can engineer that in and automate it. So all those retention campaigns work really well. The ROIs are all positive. And what's on the roadmap for 2022 is getting more into prospecting. So identifying audiences and moving into postcards as prospecting campaigns, or getting a little bit more into touching your Amazon customers where we don't violate terms of service, right? But the no-brainer right now to start is all retention. So like a win-back campaign, an abandoned cart, those are probably the top two.
How many people are doing this by themselves versus having an agency run it for them?
Yeah, it's a good question. Because what we found is it's something, there's a hurdle. It's like, I don't know how to design a postcard, or I don't want to deal right now. Yeah. So that was like the number one hurdle to get people started. So we've essentially built like a postcard marketing agency inside the company where we do it all for you. We're basically like, give us some information about your store, about your Shopify store, about your customer base. We'll create the campaigns. They're designed by great designers we've got on staff. You give us the feedback or you give us the green light, and then we send for you. So that's been like the biggest hurdle is like, where do I start? And at the end of the day, we'll do it for you. Now, I don't know if we'll do that forever, but I could imagine something like Klaviyo probably had to start there too, where you're not doing like a win back. Let us like build out a flow for you. It's that sort of that concierge model in SaaS.
You doing designs on Canva probably doesn't fit into your strategic plan of growth.
No, you got to hustle and do that stuff early on. But now we've got, fortunately, much better designers than I am. Yeah.
What's the difference between running a SaaS business and an e-commerce business?
I feel like, your customer acquisition is so hard in e-commerce and lifetime values are so low. The direct-to-consumer businesses where it's like you got an LTV of like $50, when they buy like 2 bottles of my supplement or whatever, and then they're gone. You're a gladiator in the arena. You're like fighting and fighting just to like get that customer, and then you start the next month at 0 again, and you got to do it all over again. And you take that great e-commerce marketer and you kind of drop them into a SaaS business, and like the heavens open up, and it's just like, this is amazing because the biggest thing, lifetime values are massive. I mean, ours are in the tens of thousands, right? Because people, it's like email, like they get hooked, and they're getting an ROI.
Think about Klaviyo's lifetime value.
Yeah, so you acquire that customer, and they're just there. They're just going to be there for years, and it's more about like increasing the revenue off that customer over time, making sure they don't churn. But lifetime value is super high, which means you can do all this interesting stuff on the marketing side that you couldn't do when you're slinging floor mats, right? Like, it makes economic sense for us to have an enterprise sales team, to get on the phone, to send cool gifts to the customers, or do their campaigns for them. None of which you would do in a direct response ad for a product. Yeah. So I think that's the biggest difference. The the challenges, whereas I would say e-commerce, the challenges all are around customer acquisition. There's a lot in SaaS, the customers are around talent acquisition. So you need developers. Like that's the biggest difference, I think, in eComm. The last year has been rough because it's hard to recruit, right? But in general, you can hire junior people, train them up, and you can have a store up and running. In SaaS, it's getting developers, which I think is like that competition for developers is pretty incredible.
And how are you finding developers? Is it through your network, or are you putting out job posts and trying to compete on the marketplace?
I asked the CEO I say we probably need to hire developers than the CEO. The CEO does it, but I think we're doing all those things. He's doing all those things. Sure. It's a big part of his job.
It's really interesting. How about managing, like, do you have different goals for your e-commerce businesses versus your SaaS business?
Yeah, and I mean, this is broadly speaking, I want to say the e-commerce businesses are run for cash flow, and the SaaS businesses are run for an exit. So, the name of the game for us in SaaS, or at least for PostPilot, is like, let's get to X, in MRR a month, because we know our valuation goes 3X by the time we get there. The valuations are often based off of revenue at a certain point. So it really, and that multiple goes up, 1 times, then 2 times, then 3 times. It's really compelling once you start getting north of that.
Yeah.
And every dollar should be reinvested in the business, push back into your enterprise sales team, your customer success team, your developers, right? So you're not running that business for cash flow. I feel like it's so competitive. If you do that, you're going to get lapped and forgotten, Whereas in e-commerce, I think if you've got a defensible product, you can take more cash out of the business each year. There isn't that pressure to kind of grow or die.
Sure.
So that's a big difference.
Switching gears a little bit. So now that you're 50, what is your message? What is your message to your 35-year-old self? What would you tell them? What have you learned over the last 15 years?
I think it just, when I was that age, I was running my first e-commerce retailer, which I ran for like 10 years. And I think, I don't want to say it's impatience, but I wouldn't run something for 10 years again. There's a little bit of it was a lifestyle business. I ran that business when Tim Ferriss came out with the 4-hour work week. I was like, well, I'm running what he's talking about. I'm not working that much on it. I travel. I take money out each year. And, it was 10 years of my life spent just before I was married, before I had kids, when I probably should have just forget the lifestyle business, get some urgency and go bigger, Now, when I have a wife, a kid, kids, and I think my risk return is such that lifestyle business is a little bit more interesting now. But back then, I'd probably just say don't waste 10 years running this. You're going to make all the money on the exit, grow to that exit as fast as you can, and then move on to the next one. Just iterate quickly.
What do you consider a lifestyle business now?
Now it's a little bit more if you buy companies, you typically work a management fee into the company. It can often be structured as a percentage of EBITDA. So if you buy enough companies and you've got enough little seeds out there planted, you're kind of getting a management fee off these businesses. So it's not a pure passive income stream like real estate might be, but it's nice because you can kind of drop in on any of them, work on them for a while, move on to the next one, and all the while you are making a living off of owning it.
Sure. So the management fee. So you basically can work it in where you buy. How would you structure that? Would you structure it in a holding company then, where you're buying them?
Yeah, you could. I've seen people do one-off deals. Other people have a fund. Other people have a holding company that you kind of own, that owns all these things. For me, it's it's one corporate structure for each business.
Cool.
Because they're not enough synergies between them.
Sure.
And I hope to sell them at different times.
Sure. Drew, this has been awesome, man. I really love chatting with you. It's always super interesting. Just happened I'm 35, so that's what I was asking. Turning 35 in about...
You're doing it right, Austin. You're doing all the right things.
So a little self-survey question, but I also think I think the average age is somewhere between 35 and 40 of the podcast.
Yeah,
listeners.
and I'm just amazed, like you look at when I was 35, there was no e-commerce influence. There was it was just me and a bunch of books from the library trying to figure out e-commerce. So
how crazy has it been just over the last 10, 15 years about how it's truly been an incredible wave with e-commerce, and it's just moved so fast. And it's interesting looking back and being like, all these things that we take for granted now just did not exist. The market's a lot. My personal view on it is that the market has matured substantially, and what you could succeed with 10 years ago just by being first, just by being, that's all you needed was let's do something first online. And now it's just, unless you're selling drugs, you're not first.
I think the big companies got big because they were able to arbitrage an emerging channel. So if you look back at we were Web 1.0, whenever, Google came out. And then all of a sudden, if you had a long tail dropship business, you ranked in the top 5, right? To add products to your site was to market because you were just ranking really well. You made money, you grew. That's how we grew. That's how Wayfair grew in the early days. There were a slew of them. And then that became arbitraged out of existence because there was too many competitors. But then AdWords came along, and you look at eHow and a lot of the businesses that grew off of AdWords when it was pennies per click, same story. And then it was Facebook ads, which were so cheap. And I think that led to the emergence of a lot of D2C winners for people who understood Facebook and that they could get cheap ads. I think that window's closing. So it's what's the next big channel to arbitrage? I think TikTok, influencers, I think offline. I mean, when you're spending a couple $1 million a month on Facebook ads, all of a sudden, an actual sales team that goes door to door looks attractive, catalogs. I think these are the things in postcard marketing. That's kind of why I'm doubling down on PostPilot. But I think these are the channels that are going to grow the brands for the next couple of years.
Is this the best time ever to sell your e-commerce business?
At least I can only look backwards, and I'd say over the last 20 years, yeah.
It's kind of wild, man. I've just been seeing every single week multiple $100 million exits happening.
Yep.
And it's a lot of these companies, some of them have been hanging around for a while, and you thought are they ever going to sell? And then boom, they're kind of popping off for 400 million, 500 million, or SPACing, seeing some $1 billion SPACs.
Yeah. Solo brands, those guys.
Yeah. It's wild.
Cool stuff. Yeah.
Drew, it's been awesome. I really appreciate you hopping on, and good luck. PostPilot. I know it's going to continue to grow.
I would encourage anybody listening to this in your audience to check it out. And if you need help, email me. Just drew@postpilot.com.
Yeah. And we also have inside the membership, Drew came in, did a whole tutorial on how to use it, make it really easy for you. I think we even have an offer in there as well. I'm not sure what it is. I can't remember.
Basically, we'll do everything for you.
Yeah.
And if that's still the offer.
Drew will design your postcard from his desk.
Sure.
He'll have his VA do it, he's actually his own VA. Drew, thanks, man. Thanks so much. I will talk to you later.
Sounds good, Austin. Good catching up.